Welcome back to the North Florida Wrestling Show. We have a great one for you today. We got two guests on today to talk about the fusion of BJJ and wrestling. We have Wesley Lumpkin of the Gulf Coast Grappling Academy, as well as Marcelo Alcantar of the Panda Wrestling Alliance to come on and talk a little bit about the benefits and answer some of the questions we got. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, welcome to the North Florida Wrestling Show. I'm your host, Jordan Cohn, and today we have two amazing guests who are experts in the wrestling BJJ fusion. Our first guest is Wesley Lumpkin, a BJJ black belt and former state champion wrestler from Georgia. He's the owner of Gulf Coast Grappling Academy and has been grappling for over 20 years. Our second guest is Marcelo Alcantar, the lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, a third-degree Gracie Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Pedro Sauer, and the owner of 3 affiliate schools in Florida teaching Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling, known as the Panda Wrestling Alliance. All right, well, let's go and get started into it. Wesley, I've known you for a little bit. I actually got a chance to wrestle around with you before we moved from the Panama City area with your Gulf Coast Grappling Academy. I've always been interested to talk to you more, but I've never had the chance to get you long enough. How did you transfer from your wrestling background to BJJ?
I wrestled in school and a little bit in college, and I actually took like 3 years grappling, and that was actually, to tell you the truth, I was really scared to start a new sport because state champion wrestler, collegiate athlete, and then I was scared to start over with anything else. I had a lot of friends that were starting jiu-jitsu, but I took like 3 years off of grappling. And I was like, I need to get back on the mat, and but jiu-jitsu was just the more feasible option, and so I just dove into it head first, and the transition was super easy for me, and it's not like other people, but I just took to it like a shark in water, and I just never looked back, hit the ground running, and I've just been training ever since.
Well, Marcelo, I actually have less. I've had a couple interactions with you, but I don't really know your history as much. You're more of a BJJ guy that started incorporating your wrestling into the academies, or how did you get so involved into the wrestling community as a BJJ guy?
Well, I'm going to kind of expand a little bit, like what Wesley was saying before, but wrestling, the aspect of wrestling that's always, for me, with my jiu-jitsu style, it's always been there. So where Wesley was, the shark coming in, for me, it was a little different because I didn't have any wrestling experience. I didn't have any jiu-jitsu experience. And, Wesley came from Georgia. And it's kind of funny because my jiu-jitsu journey started at Alliance headquarters in Sandy Spring with one of the, greatest teams in competition history. It's Alliance, with Jacare Cavalcanti and working with Roberto Travin. And I didn't feel like a shark. It felt like I was meat thrown to the wolves, so to speak. And just like Wesley was saying, most of the people that first came in there ready to, do some damage on people were wrestlers. So my first experience, my first encounter was with, a mix of experience, a mix of jiu-jitsu people, a mix of beginners and a ton of wrestlers. So I was kind of forced to learn how to wrestle, even though it wasn't my high school experience. I've been wrestling for jiu-jitsu since 2003.
So I was actually curious. So I know you have 2 outstanding wrestlers right now in Helena and Riley. Did they start out as jiu-jitsu based, or did you have them start out in wrestling?
So they started out with jiu-jitsu. Riley started when he was 4, and Helena started jiu-jitsu when she was 7. Again, my style of jiu-jitsu, it was very unique because jiu-jitsu these days is very sport driven. And so, Wesley can attest to this too. The aspect of it caters to the person who pulls guard or works from sitting. It started to shift a little bit because of all the wrestlers who are starting to come in. But you brought up Helena and Riley as my 2 kids who went out there and started competing. But Man, I mean, we just came back from the Florida State Championships with multiple state placers. We got the Barnellis. We got, I believe, Beckham placed, Beckham Barnelli, Grayson Barnelli placed, their sister Cora Barnelli placed. We got the Coleman twins, Damien and Jaden. You got to watch out for those guys because they're the Colemans are the ones who started our trend towards wrestling for our jiu-jitsu program in the first place. So, we started our wrestling program about 3 years ago, and honestly, it started with the Coleman twins, and ever since then, we've just been we've been producing some killers in wrestling.
So it's weird that you start talking about the pull and guard because I went from wrestling into like grappling kind of world, and I know me and Wesley were talking about this a little bit before you had popped on about how that was always very frustrating for me as a wrestler trying to like go and grapple with or roll with some BJJ guys because I was always trying to like keep it on the feet, and then they would just try to like pull guard. Wesley, as a wrestler guy going to BJJ, what are your feelings on guys pulling guard like that in sport jiu-jitsu?
Well, if you have a good game plan for that sitting guard, especially in no-gi, like where people want to attack the feet, if you have a good game a plan and to pass the legs, and stay on top, then that works well for myself, But I had to hit and I had to get used to that too. But it works out really well for me because I don't like to sit down all that much. And so you just adapt to be a fairly good passer, just as long as you don't get in a leg entanglement and just in a very wrestler-esque kind of way, just once on top, stay on top.
Marcel, you and I were talking at I forget what term it is, but we were walking out, and I think I was talking about how wrestlers are a little bit stubborn on transitioning to new things. I think you hit it on the nail, Wesley. Actually, you're talking about being, especially if you were really good at wrestling, it is intimidating to go into like another thing like jiu-jitsu or even folk, high level folk style wrestlers in the area, are very apprehensive to go to freestyle or Greco. And I had never really thought of it like you had presented it, Marcelo, that BJJ guys can be just as stubborn on trying to transition to wrestling. Can you expand on that? Because I really never thought of it from the BJJ to wrestling kind of mindset.
Well, again, for my style of jiu-jitsu, the transition to wrestling for a lot of my students was very seamless. Helena struggled a little bit more because she liked to play guard, but you bring up the stubbornness aspect of it, right? It's difficult when you have a wrestler going to a traditional jiu-jitsu school because traditional jiu-jitsu schools go completely against the rule book of what wrestling is, right? They're sitting on their, I don't want to say everybody's sitting on their butt, but honestly, a lot of people are sitting on their butt. A lot of people are conserving their energy. A lot of people won't stand with a wrestler because of the intensity involved in, initiating a takedown, right? And then you go over to the jiu-jitsu side of things where you got jiu-jitsu players trying to become wrestlers, right? It takes them completely out of their comfort zone. And that's one thing that's what's cool about jiu-jitsu when it comes to self-defense, right? Jiu-jitsu, although uncomfortable, has a lot of comfort to it, right? Whereas wrestling, man, once you slap hands and you're going, there's no comfort whatsoever. It's intense. It's 100% head-to-head, grindy in your face. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, I can be lazy. I can let the person work the whole time, and I can just keep him from passing my guard. And, if you got a guy who is, or a school that's traditionally guard playing and working from the bottom, it's a big deterrent to try to transition into something that is just a polar opposite like wrestling.
Well, do you think there's any way that, because I know that the history of wrestling actually did have professional roots where they did a very catch as catch can kind of submission wrestling, and I know they tried to do something very similar with like Gordon Ryan versus Bo Nickel like a year and a half ago, where they tried to make it to where the rules were like, very balanced. Do you think we'll ever see something like that? Or do you think the competitions will kind of skew more just BJJ and then wrestling stays wrestling?
I think as of right now, you know, Nogi is more submission wrestling. The point system is fairly similar to wrestling in one way or another. You know, two for reversal, two for takedown. You just get points for passing the guard and knee on belly and stuff like that. But I really think it will be segregated in a way. I don't think you'll ever see something more balanced in a way. You know, because then you're talking about what rule set of wrestling are you going to comply to, freestyle or folk styles, locking hands, front headlock, stuff like that.
Well, that actually brings me to my next question. Do you think I think you and I were talking about this. I'm starting to notice that in North Florida, it's a lot easier to sell people on folk style guys going into BJJ than it is trying to sell these guys all going to freestyle or Greco. In your all's academies, do y'all primarily go folk style when it comes to wrestling? I think you were telling me that that's what y'all normally focus on, Wesley, correct?
Well, we have a heavy emphasis on neutral. So when you break down the styles, you know, folk style is poetry in motion. Jiu-jitsu is more poetry. I'd say, but folk style is more comparable to jiu-jitsu only because you get the mat wrestle versus freestyle. You get taken down, you lay on the mat. Parterre. So, you know, but the emphasis on neutral is get that first takedown. You know, it was drilled into my brain by my coach. Always get the first takedown. So it's like not in a Ricky Bobby kind of way, you're first or last, but no, you want the first takedown. And you know, freestyle is so aggressive because you are actively getting that takedown because you need that takedown because if not, you parterre, there's no mat wrestling, there's no reversal, there's no Granby to a 5-point Peterson, you know. So I think that's why BJJ and folk style are comparable.
That makes perfect sense. But I think that's why you see a lot of people in MMA that because it's like a lot of people say like wrestling is the best base for MMA, but I think like folk style wrestling is the best for MMA because it very much is, you know, controlling someone on the ground. I think you're very right. That does make a good point too. That's one thing I do enjoy about BJJ is that there is no like someone come to save you. If you get stuck in guard, you better get out of that guard. You know, you better be able to pass it or at least be able to disengage from that guard instead of having to wait for someone to stand you back up or like, you know, get you out of that position. So I've always appreciated that about BJJ. Marcel, how has wrestling enhanced the takedowns and control in your BJJ students? You know, I noticed that a lot of your, like Riley, for instance, Riley has fantastic takedowns. He is definitely not someone that is doesn't seem like ready to pull guard.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, the takedown game has just dramatically shifted. You know, our jujitsu was already top heavy, takedown heavy, but to introduce the dynamics and the details of like real, true wrestling from the folk style and freestyle aspect of it, I mean, it's just changed our top game tremendously. If you watch a jiu-jitsu tournament, you see a lot of these people when they first start standing, their initial gut reaction in a jiu-jitsu tournament is to sit. And if they're not sitting, they have this awkward position where their intent is not to shoot. And even when they do shoot, they're not shooting properly. So, I mean, what wrestling has definitely done for a lot of my jiu-jitsu players is it's given them a dominant, more superior position against other jiu-jitsu players. But on top of that, the intensity and the tenacity that you get from wrestling, a lot of jiu-jitsu kids now, when they see like, you know, someone from Gulf Coast Grappling or they see somebody from Panda, they're like, oh man, I got to go up against this guy, you know, because they know the first 30 seconds is going to be painful. If they're going to pull guard, they're going to have to work for it. Most jiu-jitsu people, they walk into the guard position or they start initiating their little tiny guard pass. But when you see a wrestler working the guard pass, it's like watching a mongoose, you know, attacking a snake, or it's like watching a wolf, you know, go after a rabbit. You know, that's the difference between a wrestler, hybrid jiu-jitsu player, you know, going up against another jiu-jitsu player versus jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu.
Well, so Wesley, you know, kind of piggybacking off of that of what BJJ or wrestling has done for BJJ. What can you attest to for what BJJ does for wrestlers? Because I feel like there is probably a huge misconception that it can't add anything to it because you're on your back a lot of time, which for wrestling, that's like cardinal sin.
You have the option to play from your back, right? That's not always necessarily everybody's game. It's just if a wrestler was doing jiu-jitsu like myself, I have the option. Now I do sit a lot. Like I sit down with my students, so like Marcelo can attest to this. Like there's just a gentleman's agreement when we go and start rolling, right? One person's sitting and one person starts from their knees. This is just like a general gentleman's agreement when you start a match in your gym.
It's funny you brought up catch wrestling because we had Stephen Abbas. He's a silver medalist, the best 125-pound wrestler that ever existed, and he was hanging out with us, and he said to me, what do you think? What's the difference between freestyle and folk style? And I said, I said what I experienced, what I saw, and he said that's completely wrong. And I asked him, what do you mean by that? And he said, folk style and freestyle, the international, freestyle international wrestling versus our domestic folk style wrestling, they came from two separate, different animals. And that's when he told me the story about catch wrestling. Freestyle didn't come from catch wrestling. Folk style came from catch wrestling, and trying to figure out, well, how can we make, catch wrestling safer, and so we can implement it, in the public, in academic school systems. They started taking out the submissions and taking out all the things that can cause potential harm or injury, right? And so, folk style and freestyle are completely separate. Catch wrestling and folk style wrestling have more similarities. When you look at you pointed on some similarities between folks catch wrestling and jiu-jitsu. There's some similarities, but the biggest difference that I can tell you between catch wrestling and jiu-jitsu is that what Helio Gracie did very well is that he was that smaller, weaker person, right? So a lot of times he had to work from his back. A lot of times he'd get a sweep, but even from the sweep, he would get reversed and would have to continue to work from his back. So catch wrestling and jiu-jitsu have their similarities, but I think the biggest difference is with catch wrestling is back then there wasn't as much of a repertoire working from your back, going for arm bars from the back, triangles from the back, working sweeps from your back, those kind of things. So I think those are the biggest differences between catch wrestling and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. A lot of similar submissions, a lot of similar top position, but the superiority of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu working from your back and working for sweeps is like drastically different. Whereas you see a lot of catch wrestling, as soon as they got put on their back, they know how to shrimp now, but back then shrimping wasn't a thing. Utilizing your hips to establish butterfly hooks wasn't a thing. So that's that was what I gathered experience-wise from catch wrestling versus folk style versus jiu-jitsu versus freestyle.
Shrimping is such an important aspect to teach the wrestlers, and that I haven't sold them on it yet. And even though we try and make them shrimp, but you're talking about the very fundamental base of jiu-jitsu, right? Side control pin, north south pin, pinning combinations in wrestling, or positional positions for Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? The shrimping aspect is getting out of every pinning combination. And I'm like, why didn't you shrimp out of that head and arm? Or what, when they got that half, or, why didn't you shrimp? And they're like, well, I didn't think about it. You're specifically taught to bridge or look away, get that shoulder off the mat. Instead, you could shrimp and get out of that pinning combination. The key is what? Get the elbow to the mat, right? Get your elbow to the mat, get on your side and shrimp. You're shrimping out of every pinning combination, instead of doing what you're traditionally taught to bridge or look away.
See, I like that. What you just said, traditionally, like you have to kind of, when you go into like BJJ as a wrestler, you have to get, untraditional, or vice versa. It's very untraditional. It makes you think of the sport in different ways, or you think of your positioning in different ways. And sometimes that translates really well to the sport that is your main sport. Like I know, just like you say, shrimping. Ever since I started, grappling and getting better at my shrimping, my scrambling has gotten better. It's helped keep me out of a lot of different situations. But I know you guys got a lot to do, so finally I want to just end on this one question of what advice do you guys have for wrestlers looking to make the transition into BJJ and for BJJ practitioners interested in incorporating wrestling into their training?
Yeah, I can take that. Uh, Honestly, if a wrestler wants to get into jujitsu, um, you got to shop around. You can't just assume that, oh, I need jujitsu. There's this big topic on Ricky Marcus's the Florida Wrestling Room, where they're always talking about, is jujitsu good for wrestling? Is wrestling good for jujitsu? And then they bring into play judo. Um, in all honesty, a jujitsu academy that has a big emphasis in top game, that has a big emphasis in, yes, I can work from my back, but my ultimate goal is to get from my back, get a sweep, and work top position. A jiu-jitsu environment that is big into judo, working over unders, working hand control and hand fighting, that's very important. If a wrestler just assumes I can just go to this jiu-jitsu school here where their specialty is spider guard and berimbolo and things like that, it's going to hurt their wrestling game really bad, you know. Um, and you brought up for jujitsu people going into wrestling. What's my advice to jujitsu people going into wrestling? Do it. That's just it. Just do it, because you look at it from a self defense perspective. Our system of jujitsu, like across the United States, if you look at it now, the reason for it in the first place was for self defense. And now when people come up to me and ask me what's the best form of self defense for somebody who's only going to get 1 year of training, period, at all, and I'm going to be honest with you, I don't feel like jujitsu is now the number one savior for self defense. All you need is a good takedown, and that'll protect you from 99% of your encounters. Take down and stay there, or take down and run. But for jujitsu people, the fact of the matter is, um, pick the right wrestling school, but just go in there. I'm a black belt. I'm a black belt. I get my butt kicked by wrestlers all the time. You have to be willing to accept the fact that you know nothing in order to get better.
Yeah, for sure. And schools, have to be. I guess the reason why we do so well in the community is just because just the heavy emphasis on wrestling growing up, and I love jujitsu, and so I encourage everybody to do jujitsu. And so I was just talking with Marcelo this morning that I have three wrestlers that just started with postseason. That have been coming in for the last 2 years and watch us before class. And they're like, man, I really want to do this. And I'm like, you should have started 2 years ago. Look where you would have been. And even you're talking about incorporating everything. Grappling is just such a broad spectrum, nowadays, that we integrate so well. And we didn't even talk about judo and what judo does for your game. And Marcelo just brought it up. I was watching a reel the other day, and it's like it was a standing Granby. And I don't want to go off on another tangent. I know this is the tail end of this thing. But a standing Granby, okay, well, that's fine. But what you're actually doing is you're doing a judo takedown into what they call a Peterson, but you're doing a judo takedown into a side control position there. And so and then wrestlers, and I took them over. I have a big poster in the gym, and I'm sure Marcelo has one somewhere. But you have the original 47 techniques, like the original throws for judo. And I was like, more judo than you think. And I'm looking, pointing at all these takedowns. And I was like, judo. And judo is not a foreign concept to you. And that's why when you just realize that grappling has just been around for generations, centuries. It's here. More than you think. And then so we do judo for wrestling, and the kids have a lot of fun with it, and it works really well for our freestyle game. But it just integrates so well. And yeah, I want every wrestler to do jiu-jitsu. I want every jiu-jitsu team to wrestle,
Well,
So,
man, dude, I'm glad that I got y'all on. I definitely want to have y'all on again and talk about the same thing because I've been talking about this for like 10 years. Like, especially too, if, any high school wrestlers that are done or college wrestlers that are done and, you don't want to leave the mat, you don't have to. Like, that's my biggest thing and my biggest push for kids, especially if they don't want to go to college and wrestle. It's like, stay on the mat, stay on the mat. It's obviously done you something good being on the mat and being in that environment for however long you were allowed to do it in middle school, high school. You don't have to put it away just because the state championships are over and you can't go back next year. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't make sense to put something away that's been so beneficial and can help you learn and grow. And you just, like you said, it's just all grappling, Wesley. At the end of the day, it's all grappling. It's all learning. It's all personal, growth. And, with BJJ, at least you get a nice, cool little belt to show everybody. Wrestling, you just get a couple bruises. You know what I mean?
I just want to give a shout out to the Panda Wrestling Alliance and all those people that are out there supporting us. Big shout out to Coach Cody Dixon, who is like our head wrestling coach, and to Coach Calvin Kanya, who just opened up our Panda Wrestling in Crestview. He's doing amazing things. Take advantage. He's an active duty military person, and just be there. My last thing is I got a little wrestler, okay, and he left a couple days ago to go to the hospital. His name is Paul Ikaika Abele, and he has been living with stage 4 kidney disease for many, many years. And he just loved competing in jiu-jitsu and loved competing in wrestling. He never told anybody, and he just kept working hard. And he just became the recipient of a new kidney. So all I'm asking from you guys is if you could just pray for Paul Ikaika Abele, just pray for him and just wish him well. I would really appreciate that.
And also the same shout out to the Black Sheep community. There's so many parents in the community that support the program and are fully committed to myself. And I wouldn't be anywhere, without my wife. She's the backbone of the gym. And people come up all the time. They're like, "How do I pay?" Or "How do I get to this?" And I was like, "I don't know, bro. I just teach. Go talk to her. She runs the day to day." But there's so many people, and Marcelo and I will continue to work together. Always a great mentor to learn from.
All right, and that's the show today, North Florida wrestling fans. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate Marcelo Alcantar from Panda Wrestling Alliance, as well as Wesley Lumpkin from Gulf Coast Grappling Academy. I really loved being able to explore the importance and benefits of cross-training wrestling in BJJ for both practitioners, and I loved being able to explore the evolution of folk-style wrestling from catch wrestling and to really get an understanding of why they work so well together. All right, I know we just scratched the surface, so make sure you tune in for more North Florida Wrestling Show. Soundstripe.